There is an object sitting in a glass case in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens that should not exist. It is not a statue. It is not a coin. It is not a weapon. It is a corroded lump of green bronze, no larger than a shoebox, fused together by 2,000 years of salt water and calcified ocean sediment. To the untrained eye, it looks like garbage, something you'd walk past without a second glance. And for over half a century, that is exactly what the entire academic world did. They walked past it, filed it away, forgot it. But inside that lump, buried beneath layers of mineral crust thicker than a human fingernail, are at least 30 precision-cut bronze gears, interlocking, meshing, arranged with a mechanical sophistication that would not appear anywhere else on Earth for another 1,400 years. Let that land for a moment. 1,400 years. That is the gap between this object and the next known device of comparable complexity. That is longer than the entire lifespan of the Roman Empire, longer than the distance between the fall of Constantinople and the phone in your pocket. This single artifact doesn't just challenge the timeline of technological progress, it demolishes it. It takes the story we were all taught, that innovation marches forward in a neat, ascending line from primitive to modern, and snaps it in half like a dry stick. This is the Antikythera Mechanism, and what it reveals about the ancient world is, frankly, more unsettling than any conspiracy theory ever invented, because the truth is worse. The truth is that someone, over 2 millennia ago, built a pocket-sized model of the universe out of hand-cut bronze gears. And then we lost the ability to understand how they did it. Here is how we found it, and here's what it cost us to finally read what it says. Spring 1900. The Eastern Mediterranean. A crew of Greek sponge divers, led by Captain Dimitrios Kondos, is sailing from the Dodecanese Islands toward the coast of North Africa. Sponge diving in 1900 is industrial labor. Brutal, dangerous, and conducted in copper helmets with hand-pumped air hoses that tangle and fail. Sponge diving in 1900 is industrial labor. Brutal, dangerous, and conducted in copper helmets with hand-pumped air hoses that tangle and fail. A violent storm forces them to anchor off a barren speck of rock between Crete and the Peloponnese, the island of Antikythera. Population? Almost nobody. Strategic value? None. The kind of place you stop at only because the sea is trying to kill you. While waiting for the weather to break, the divers do what sponge divers do. They go down. One of them, Elias Stadiatis, descends to roughly 45 meters, 150 feet. At that depth, the visibility narrows. The light turns green, then blue, then nearly black. And when Stadiatis surfaces, he is not calm. He is panicking, babbling about rotting corpses and dead horses piled on the seafloor. His crewmates think the nitrogen narcosis has gotten to him, that the depth has scrambled his brain. Captain Kondos goes down himself. What he finds is not a graveyard. It is a Roman-era merchant ship, a massive vessel that sank sometime in the 1st century BC, carrying the most extraordinary cargo of looted Greek art ever discovered. An entire museum's worth of antiquity scattered across the rocks at the bottom of the Aegean. An entire museum's worth of antiquity scattered across the rocks at the bottom of the Aegean. The corpses Stadiatis saw were corroded bronze figures, their surfaces eaten into shapes that, in the half-light of 45 meters, look disturbingly organic. The corpses Stadiatis saw were corroded bronze figures, their surfaces eaten into shapes that, in the half-light of 45 meters, look disturbingly organic. The Greek government dispatches the Hellenic Navy. A formal salvage operation runs from late 1900 into 1901. The work is grueling. Divers can stay at that depth for only minutes at a time. One diver is paralyzed by decompression sickness. 2 others die. Piece by piece, the treasures are hauled to the surface and shipped to Athens. Among them, logged as an afterthought, barely catalogued, is a shapeless, corroded mass of bronze. Nobody pays it much attention. Why would they? Next to a life-sized bronze statue of a young athlete, a crusty rock is not going to make headlines. 2 years pass. Then, in 1902, an archaeologist named Valerios Stais is sorting through the recovered fragments at the Athens Museum. He picks up one of the corroded pieces, turns it over, and stops. Embedded in the calcified surface, unmistakable, is a gear wheel. Teeth, precisely cut, evenly spaced. The kind of mechanical component you associate with clocks, not with antiquity. Stais raises the alarm, and the academic establishment responds with something that, in retrospect, looks a lot like embarrassment. The consensus is swift and dismissive. It is an astrolabe, a simple navigational tool, perhaps medieval in origin, mixed in with the older cargo by accident. The idea that ancient Greeks could have manufactured a complex geared mechanism is treated as, at best, naive, at worst, delusional. For over 50 years, the most sophisticated piece of ancient technology ever recovered sits in storage, accumulating dust while the rest of the world rockets into modernity. For over 50 years, the most sophisticated piece of ancient technology ever recovered sits in storage, accumulating dust, while the rest of the world rockets into modernity, without ever suspecting what was sleeping in that cabinet. Then, in 1951, a British historian of science named Derek de Solla Price walks into the Athens Museum. And something shifts. Price is not a classicist. He is not an archaeologist. He is a physicist by training, with a restless, pattern-hunting mind. The kind of researcher who doesn't just catalog facts, but interrogates them. He sees the mechanism fragments. He studies the visible gear teeth. And he arrives at a conclusion that the establishment has been avoiding for half a century. This is not a navigational trinket. This is a computational instrument. In 1959, Price publishes a paper in Scientific American with a title that reads like a provocation: An Ancient Greek Computer. The response is predictable: skepticism, pushback, the same reflexive dismissal that buried Valerios Stais. Critics call it an anomaly, a one-off curiosity, an outlier that proves nothing about the broader capabilities of ancient Greek engineering. Price ignores them. He keeps digging. In 1971, he secures access to the fragments again, this time armed with modern diagnostic tools. He partners with Charalambos Karakalos, a Greek nuclear physicist, and together they subject the 82 surviving fragments to X-ray and gamma-ray imaging. For the first time, someone is looking inside the mechanism without cracking it apart. The images reveal an internal architecture of interlocking gears far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Multiple gear trains, layered components, evidence of differential gearing, a technology that Western Europe would not rediscover until the 16th century. In 1974, Price publishes his definitive work, Gears from the Greeks, the Antikythera Mechanism, a calendar computer from circa 80 BC. It is a meticulous, exhaustive forensic report, and its central thesis is devastating in its simplicity. The ancient Greeks did not just theorize about the cosmos, they engineered it. They compressed centuries of astronomical observation into a handheld machine made of bronze. What Price had uncovered was not just a clever gadget, it was evidence of an entire engineering culture, a tradition of precision metalwork, mathematical modeling, and astronomical computation that had been operating at full capacity 2 centuries before the birth of Christ. Price didn't just find gears inside that lump of corroded metal. He found the fingerprints of a civilization that had been systematically underestimated for 2,000 years. He died in 1983, 9 years after his landmark publication, before the full implications of his work could be validated by the technology that would eventually prove him right. But the case he built was airtight, and the next generation of investigators would take it even further than he imagined. In 2005, an international research team called the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, led by astronomer Mike Edmonds of Cardiff University, convinced the Athens Museum to allow something unprecedented. They would bring the scanner to the artifact, not the other way around. a custom-built 8-ton micro-focus X-ray computed tomography machine, manufactured by a company called X-Tech Systems, was transported to the museum and positioned around the fragile bronze fragments. Think about that image for a moment. An 8-ton piece of 21st-century imaging technology, built to peer inside jet engine turbine blades and aerospace components, aimed at a device constructed by hand over 2,000 years ago. Two eras of engineering, separated by more than 2 millennia, facing each other across a laboratory table. The CT scans sliced through the calcified ocean crust the way a scalpel cuts through scar tissue. And what they revealed was staggering. 30 surviving gears, out of an estimated original 37, each one cut with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. Teeth as small as 1.5 millimeters. Gear ratios calculated to replicate astronomical cycles that span decades. And a pin and slot mechanism. 2 gears linked by a small pin riding in a slot that mechanically models the elliptical orbit of the moon. The moon speeds up at perigee, slows down at apogee. And this device, built in the 2nd century BC, replicates that variable motion with nothing but bronze and geometry. Johannes Kepler would not formalize the mathematics of elliptical orbits until 1609 AD. But the gears were only half the revelation. The CT scans also exposed something hidden beneath the corrosion that no one had been able to read before. Inscriptions, thousands of characters. Tiny Greek letters, each one barely a millimeter tall, etched into the bronze plates and covers of the device. The imaging doubled the amount of legible text overnight. Over 3,500 characters emerged from the murk. And those characters were not decorative. They were instructions, a user manual, written in ancient Greek explaining, dial by dial, function by function, exactly what this machine was designed to do. Imagine finding a fossilized smartphone inside a Roman wall. Then imagine that the smartphone still has its instruction booklet tucked inside the case. That is the cognitive dissonance these scans produced. So, what did it actually do? The answer is almost too large to fit inside a single sentence. The front of the mechanism displayed a working model of the cosmos as the ancient Greeks understood it. A dial tracked the position of the sun against the 12 signs of the zodiac and a 365-day Egyptian calendar. A separate pointer tracked the moon, not just its position, but its phase, rendered on a tiny rotating ball, half silver, half black, that showed the waxing and waning of the lunar face in real time as the user turned the crank. Additional pointers, now lost but confirmed by the inscriptions, tracked the 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Each planet's pointer was driven by its own dedicated gear train, calibrated to replicate the planet's unique synodic period, the time it takes to return to the same apparent position relative to the Sun as seen from Earth. Flip it over. The back of the mechanism held 2 large spiral dials stacked vertically, each one a masterclass in compressed computation. The upper spiral tracked the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period during which 235 lunar months align almost perfectly with 19 solar years. This is the engine that synchronizes lunar calendars with solar ones, and it was the backbone of Greek civic timekeeping. The dial spiraled through 5 full turns, each turn covering 47 months, with the Corinthian month names, Phoinikaios, Kreneos, Lanotropios, engraved along the track. Those names are a forensic clue. They belong not to Athens, but to the calendar system used in Corinth and its colonies in northwestern Greece. Syracuse, Epirus, Corcyra, regions linked directly or indirectly to the legacy of Archimedes. The lower spiral tracked the Saros cycle, a 223-month period after which the Sun, Moon, and Earth returned to nearly identical relative positions, causing eclipses to repeat with eerie regularity. Tiny glyphs along the spiral indicated predicted solar and lunar eclipses, specifying the month they would occur, the time of day, and even the direction from which the moon's shadow would approach. A subsidiary dial, The exoligmos corrected for the 8-hour remainder in each Saros cycle, telling the user whether to add 0, 8, or 16 hours to their prediction. This was not approximation. This was precision eclipse forecasting, encoded in bronze, operable by anyone who could turn a crank. And then there was the detail that stops people mid-sentence when they hear it for the first time. One small subsidiary dial on the back tracked the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic Games, the Olympics at Olympia, the Pythian Games at Delphi, the Isthmian Games at Corinth, the Nemean Games at Nemea, and 2 others, the NAA at Dodona and the Heliaea at Rhodes. A sports calendar built into a cosmic computer, as if someone had embedded a FIFA World Cup countdown timer into the circuitry of a space telescope. Now, here is where a certain kind of mind goes sideways. You have seen the thumbnails, the breathless claims, ancient aliens, lost civilizations, time travelers. The conspiracy industrial complex loves the Antikythera Mechanism because it looks impossible. And anything that looks impossible must have a supernatural explanation, right? Wrong. And this is where the evidence gets more interesting than any conspiracy. The mechanism is not alien. It is not anomalous. It is the product of a specific intellectual tradition, Hellenistic science, operating at a level of sophistication that we, blinded by our own arrogance, simply refused to believe was possible. The astronomical data encoded in the gears matches the lunar theories of Hipparchus of Rhodes, the greatest observational astronomer of the ancient world. Hipparchus catalogued over 800 stars. He discovered the precession of the equinoxes, and his mathematical models of lunar motion, the variation in the moon's orbital speed, are precisely what the pin and slot mechanism replicates. If anyone's fingerprints are on this machine, they are his. But Hipparchus may not have held the tools himself. The Roman statesman Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, personally described mechanical orreries built by Posidonius of Rhodes, a Stoic philosopher, astronomer, and polymath who operated a famous school on the island. Cicero watched Posidonius demonstrate a device that replicated the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Rhodes, at this time, was the Silicon Valley of the ancient Mediterranean, a hub where astronomical theory, mathematical precision, and artisan metalwork converged in the same workshops. And then there is the shadow of Archimedes. He died in 212 BC, decades, possibly a century, before the Antikythera Mechanism was built. He could not have constructed this device. But Cicero also wrote about bronze planetaria built by Archimedes himself, captured by the Roman general Marcellus during the siege of Syracuse. Archimedes didn't build the Antikythera Mechanism, but he almost certainly built its ancestors. The tradition of mechanical computation did not appear from nowhere. It was inherited, iterated, refined over generations, which raises the real question, the one that gnaws at you once the technical awe fades. If this tradition existed, if workshops on Rhodes and in Syracuse were producing handheld cosmic computers in the 2nd century BC, then where did they all go? The answer is not romantic. It is not a tale of catastrophic loss or civilizational collapse. It is far more banal and far more brutal. Bronze is valuable. Bronze is recyclable. A single mechanism like this one contains enough metal to mint dozens of coins or cast a helmet. When an instrument broke, or when its owner died, or when a city was sacked, nobody carefully preserved the device for future archaeologists. They melted it down, recast it as coins, weapons, fittings for ships. Every last gram of that precision-cut bronze was more useful as raw material than as a relic. The Antikythera Mechanism survives for one reason and one reason only. It sank. It fell to the bottom of the Aegean in a shipwreck and was buried under sediment before anyone could salvage and recycle it. The ocean did what no museum could. It preserved it by hiding it. We did not lose this technology because we forgot how to build it. We lost it because we turned it into spare parts. Classical literature confirms this. Cicero describes multiple such devices. Byzantine and Arab scholars reference geared astronomical instruments in the centuries that followed. The great Islamic polymath al-Biruni documented a geared lunisolar calendar device in the 11th century. Richard of Wallingford built a complex astronomical clock in 14th century England. In March 2021, a team at University College London, led by Professor Tony Freeth, who had spent decades studying the mechanism, published a paper in Scientific Reports that closed the last major chapter of the investigation. Using computational modeling, Freeth's team finally reconstructed the front planetary display, the section that had been missing from every previous analysis. They built a complete digital twin of the Antikythera mechanism, every gear, every ratio, every dial. A full, functioning virtual replica of a 2,000-year-old computer, assembled inside a 21st century machine. And here is the detail that should keep you awake tonight. 2,000 years ago, an unnamed engineer, or more likely a small team of engineers, working in a Rhodian or Corinthian workshop, using nothing but hand tools, bronze sheet, and an understanding of celestial mechanics that would take the rest of the world 14 centuries to catch up to, built a device that fits in your hands and models the entire known universe, the positions of the sun and moon, the phases of the lunar cycle, the wandering paths of 5 planets, the dates of eclipses decades into the future, the schedule of the Olympic Games. Today, it took a team of PhD researchers, an 8-ton CT scanner, polynomial texture mapping, and computational modeling software running on modern hardware to figure out how they did it. We did not surpass them. We merely recovered them. Remember that a corroded lump of bronze, dismissed as junk for 60 years, turned out to be the most sophisticated scientific instrument the ancient world ever produced. And remember that it only survived because it was swallowed by the sea. There is something deeply humbling about that. We spend centuries assuming we are the culmination of progress, the pinnacle of ingenuity, the smartest version of our species that has ever lived. And then a chunk of corroded metal from the bottom of the Aegean proves otherwise. Not with a whisper, with a gear ratio. Now here's the question I want you to sit with. If this mechanism, this single, extraordinary device, only made it to us because it sank to the bottom of the Mediterranean in a shipwreck, what else is down there? What other technologies, what other instruments, what other evidence of ancient genius is sitting right now on the ocean floor, buried under 2,000 years of silt, waiting to rewrite everything we think we know? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear what you think is still out there.